But first today, across the national papers, more headlines calling out the insanity of Labor's energy transition plan, with the peak employers body, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, exposing Chris Bowen's target of 82% renewables by 2030 as simply unrealistic, a pipe dream. And it's the policy area that in the campaign will be front and centre, because it best epitomises the Albanese government's unique blend of hard left ideology and unique blend of incompetence. Instead of the government's promised $275 cut to your power bill, bills have increased by about $1,000 a year, because Albanese and Bowen have run the system to reduce emissions rather than provide you with affordable and reliable power. At the start of the government's term, Bowen said that energy transition was comparable to Australia's second industrial revolution and would need the installation of some 22,000 new solar panels every single day, 40 large wind turbines every single month for 8 years, plus the construction by 2030 of at least 10,000 kilometres of new transmission lines. Now, what he failed to mention were all the batteries, the pumped hydro schemes, the new gas peaker plants, all needed to make work an 82% renewable energy system, because the wind won't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. Unsurprisingly, none of this is happening at anything like the required pace. The Snowy 2.0 pumped hydro scheme, well, it's almost a decade behind schedule, and it has a 600% cost blowout. The Hume Link transmission line, well, it's 5 years behind schedule, and costs there have blown out 5 times. At the grassroots level, communities are waking up to the cost of Labor's renewables-only plan. They're waking up and they're fighting against it, against the government's plans to run right over the top of them with sham consultation and bully boy tactics. All of the government's offshore wind power, those zones, well, they're bedevilled with environmental protests and massive extra costs. Onshore wind, likewise, it's meeting massive resistance from farmers and conservationists, angry at the industrial desecration of prime agricultural land and our national parks. Over 70% of these wind companies, they're foreign owned. But they're trying to set up shop in Australia to cream off the lucrative taxpayer subsidies, make a big profit, send that profit offshore, and then pack up and go home and leave us with the rusting mess in our paddocks and our oceans. For a long time, businesses happily went along with the government's green pipe dream because the big subsidies via renewable energy certificates meant that renewables were a licence to print money, because theirs was always the first power sold into the grid. The price of power rose anyway as the baseload exited the system, and then they harvested subsidies as the icing on the cake. Now, just with nursing homes and childcare centres and the NDIS, shrewd business people can always spot an opportunity to make money out of government subsidising. We saw that too, didn't we, with Labor's shocking pink bat scheme a few years back. But now some of the business bodies that all went along with the government's green pipe dream are starting to point this out, and they're saying it's a slow motion train wreck. Yesterday, food distributors said their power prices had gone up by at least 50%, and they called on the government to get more reliable power and gas-fired power into the system. Today, ACCI, in addition to the earlier comments I've brought to your attention, said that the government was wrong to put all its eggs in one basket. It called for the fast-tracking of gas projects to avoid price spikes, particularly in the case of Victoria, blackouts. Likewise, the head of COSBOA, this is the peak body for small business, they said, and I quote, "We need to make sure the energy transition does not leave small business behind, because energy bills are crippling the ability of operators to stay in business." But that's hardly surprising when government ministers are unable to say just how much their green transition will cost, and instead...
What is the total system cost of the renewable plan?
Yeah. Peter Dutton's nuclear reactor strategy in terms of where we are focused on.
I don't even want to talk about his at the moment. I want to talk about your plan. What is the total? That's a pretty simple question.
So it's a question that the Energy Minister would be very happy to engage with you about.
There you go. With all the resources of government and Treasury and Finance Department, they can't tell you what it's going to cost. Well, the fact is that no other country on earth is attempting a near total transition to renewables. Just us. We're the mugs. While over 30 other countries are already using nuclear power, another 20 are seeking to use nuclear power. What does it tell you? And what it tells me, it tells me about the relative cost and feasibility of what we're trying to do here compared with what's happening internationally. Meanwhile, despite being required by legislation to release publicly by the end of this month, the government's refusing to disclose our 2035 emissions targets. Under the new climate czar, the ex-Liberal Treasurer Matt Keane, the election of Donald Trump is just the latest excuse as to why they can't be straight with voters this side of an election. Now, if you think power costs are high now, just wait until we get these new 2035 targets factored in, because presumably our targets are going to have to increase in order to compensate for America walking away from the Paris Agreement. And this time, it won't just be the power sector, electricity, that's mainly affected. The 2035 targets will hit transport in a big way, not just cars, but airline travel as well, and agriculture. The biggest ag emitters are bovine animals, and there's very little you can do to get emissions down other than to cull the national herd. So up goes the price of meat. And if you don't want an electric car, they'll try and force you into one anyway, and force you to replace your gas hot water, your gas heating, and your cooktop as well. Is it any wonder the PM is desperate to avoid voters understanding any of these 2035 targets before they vote? But this is the lifestyle revolution that's coming. If Labor gets a second term, particularly if it's a second term in alliance with the Greens and the Teals.